My colleague threatened me to eat allergic food. The police are already standing outside her house. I am a 24-year-old man, and to put it bluntly, I am a small man in more ways than one. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing a mere 103 pounds as of my last physical, my stature has always been a defining, and often challenging, aspect of my identity. It's not as if I'm unaware of the implications of my weight. I know it's unhealthy. I know people notice, and as much as I try not to let it, I know their reactions bother me. My size has been an enduring reality, a culmination of a lifetime plagued by a series of illnesses and an almost comical assortment of allergies. These aren't your run-of-the-mill inconveniences either. They're significant restrictions that have shaped every aspect of how I live my life. No meat, no dairy, no gluten, no nuts. It's a checklist that makes dining an intricate dance of avoidance. Over time, I've had to make peace with my limitations. Some days, I wear my resilience like a badge of honor. Other days, it feels like an invisible bird pressing down in moments when all I want is to blend in, to be normal. Despite these challenges, I've been making progress. Over the past several months, I've been working closely with my doctor to tackle my weight issues. It's a careful balancing act, finding ways to gain weight while staying within the constraints of my dietary restrictions. Each pound gained feels like a small victory. Every day I manage to stick to the plan, and nourish my body despite the hurdles feels like a win. It hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of how far. There's still a long road ahead, but for once, I feel like I'm walking it with purpose. And then there's Peg. Peg is a coworker of mine, a woman in her early 30s who recently returned to work after maternity. It was late November when she came back, bringing with her a mix of exhaustion and that unmistakable glow of new motherhood. At first, I didn't think much of her. We'd worked together before her leave, exchanging the usual pleasantries, but never forming any deep connection. But something shifted when she returned. It started small, almost imperceptibly, as though she had made it her mission to fix what she saw as a glaring problem. Me. The first instance was innocent enough, or so it seemed. Peg had made cupcakes to celebrate her return, a gesture to reconnect with the team and re-establish her presence. She brought them into the break room with a flourish, announcing that she'd baked them herself. They looked lovely, perfectly frosted, and adorned with little edible decoration. When she handed one to me, I thanked her politely but declined, explaining that I couldn't eat it due to my gluten allergy. Her response was unexpected. Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked genuinely crestfallen. "Oh," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I didn't know that. Well, I'll just put this one in the break room with the rest." She sighed heavily as if my refusal had cast a shadow over the entire event. I felt a pang of guilt. Had I done something wrong? It wasn't as though I could eat the cupcake just to spare her feelings. Still, the interaction left me feeling awkward and strangely responsible for her mood. The next day, she tried again. This time, it was a steak sandwich, carefully prepared on gluten-free bread. When she handed it to me, I was surprised and a little taken aback. "Thank you," I said, "but I brought my own lunch today." I gestured to the neatly packed container sitting on my desk, hoping it would serve as a sufficient explanation. Peg smiled, though there was something strained about it. "That's okay," she said cheerfully. "Just put it in the fridge. You can have it later." Her insistence was unnerving, but I didn't want to make a scene. Later, I brought the sandwich home and gave it to my boyfriend, who was more than happy to enjoy Peg's culinary efforts on my behalf. The third day brought more of the same. This time, Peg approached me in the break room, holding yet another homemade meal. When I tried to refuse, she laughed, waving off my protests as though they were a joke. "You can't keep eating that," she said, gesturing to the lunch I had painstakingly prepared to fit my dietary needs. "It's rude to refuse a home-cooked meal, you know." Her tone was lighthearted, but her words carried an edge that made my stomach twist. Not wanting to escalate the situation, I took the food, thanked her, and set it aside. Once again, it ended up in my boyfriend's hands. But Peg didn't stop there. Soon, her efforts became a daily occurrence. Bagged snacks began appearing on my desk without explanation. Portions of her previous night's dinner were delivered to me, with an expectation that I would take them. Each time I tried to decline, she would press harder, her concern morphing into something intrusive and unrelenting. She wouldn't leave my desk or stop talking until I accepted whatever she had brought. It was exhausting, and I felt trapped. Saying no seemed to have no effect, and each interaction left me feeling smaller than I already was. When it became too much to bear, I went to our boss for help. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, emphasizing that while I appreciated Peg's concern, her actions were making me uncomfortable. The response I received was disheartening. "She's probably feeling maternal," my boss said with a dismissive wave. "It would negatively impact morale to discourage her." The words felt like a slap. Maternal? As though that excused her behavior? As though my discomfort was less important than maintaining some superficial sense of harmony. Frustrated but determined, I decided to start documenting the incidents. From December 8th onward, I kept meticulous notes. What Peg brought, when she brought it, who witnessed it. By the time I confronted her, the count had reached 23. When I finally took Peg aside, my patience had worn thin. I tried to be tactful, explaining that while I was touched by her efforts, I needed her to stop. Her reaction was immediate and defensive. "You should have said something sooner," she said, her voice rising. "I was only trying to help. Have you even seen yourself in a mirror? Does your boyfriend like you starving yourself?" Each word felt like a slap, her concern twisting into something accusatory and deeply personal. I was livid. I snapped, the frustration bubbling over before I could stop it. "Maybe I don't feel like sharing my personal medical history with you, just so that my wishes are respected," I shot back, my voice shook with anger. "For God's sake, we work with a hospital. Don't you know anything about HIPAA?" It was a low blow, and I knew it. Peg's eyes filled with tears, and she turned away without another word. I stormed off, feeling a mixture of guilt and righteous indignation. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I was at my breaking point. Honestly, I've never regretted something so immediately or so profoundly in my life. The fallout from my decision to go to HR was beyond anything I could have anticipated. It didn't just escalate, it exploded, and spectacularly at that. Initially, my goal had been simple and pragmatic. I wanted to document what had happened. I wasn't seeking revenge or a dramatic confrontation. I just wanted to make sure there was a record, a safeguard in case Peg's behavior continued or escalated further. When I sat down with HR, I was calm, measured, and clear about my intentions. I even said outright that the matter, as far as I was concerned, was resolved. Peg had been spoken to, and I'd made my stance clear. I wasn't looking for punishment or a formal reprimand. But HR had other plans. They informed me that the incidents I'd described, 23 documented instances of unsolicited food offerings, public comments about my appearance, and inappropriate remarks, constituted a pattern of behavior severe enough to warrant an investigation. Witnesses would be interviewed, and Peg's actions would be corroborated. What I'd intended as a quiet documentation turned into a formal process, complete with timelines, statements, and scrutiny that went far beyond what I'd expected. By the time I arrived at work the next day, the situation had metastasized into something unrecognizable. The office was in chaos, the tension so thick you could feel it in the air. It seemed like everyone had an opinion about what had happened, and, more specifically, about me. Some coworkers agreed with me, whispering in hushed tones that Peg had been out of line. A few even approached me directly to express their support, saying they'd noticed her behavior and thought it was inappropriate. But for every supportive voice, there was another, often louder, voice taking Peg's side. "She was just trying to help," one coworker said, shaking their head as if I'd committed an unthinkable crime by rejecting her generosity. "Who could blame her?" another chimed in. "I mean, look at you. I'd be worried too." The comments were cutting, spoken in tones that ranged from condescending to outright accusatory. I heard the word ungrateful more times than I could count, as though I'd committed some cardinal sin by not accepting Peg's food. Others went even further, saying I was entitled and immature for involving HR in what they deemed a trivial matter. One person suggested that I should work from home if I couldn't handle the dynamic in the office. Another muttered that I should be ashamed of myself, though they didn't bother to say it to my face. One of the most disheartening moments came when I went to retrieve my lunch from the fridge. I'd packed it carefully that morning, as always, ensuring it met all my dietary restrictions. But when I opened the fridge, my heart sank. My lunch was gone. In its place was the empty Tupperware container, cleaned out and discarded as though to mock me. The message was clear. My presence and my choices were unwelcome. The divide in the office deepened with each passing hour. People took sides, forming cliques that whispered in corners and exchanged pointed glances. My supporters advised me to keep my head down and focus on taking care of myself, but their encouragement did little to soothe the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, unsure of who I could trust or what might happen next. Then came the meeting. My boss, who had already made it clear that she wasn't on my side, called Peg and me into her office for a resolution session. The atmosphere was stifling, the tension so palpable it felt like it might snap at any moment. "You both need to apologize," my boss began, her tone brisk and authoritative. Peg spoke first, her voice trembling with what I could only describe as performative remorse. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable by caring about your health," she said, her words dripping with passive aggression. It wasn't an apology. It was a thinly veiled accusation, a way of framing herself as the victim and me as the ungrateful aggressor. When it was my turn, I struggled to find the words. I didn't feel like I had anything to apologize for, but the weight of the room bore down on me. Reluctantly, I mumbled something about regretting the way things had escalated, though even as I said it, the words felt hollow. My boss, seemingly satisfied with the charade, turned to me and asked, "Are you satisfied now?" The question was loaded, her tone sharp with disapproval. When I tried to bring up the comments Peg had made, the ones about my appearance and my relationship, my boss dismissed them outright. "You invited those comments. she said bluntly. No one would call that harassment. You need to work on yourself. What followed was a painstaking review of every documented incident. Together, we went through all 23 events I had listed, one by one. With each example, my boss found a way to excuse Peg's behavior. She was just being thoughtful, she said of the snacks left on my desk. She's only trying to help, she insisted when I mentioned the unsolicited meals. By the end of the meeting, I felt as though the narrative had been entirely rewritten. Peg wasn't the one who had crossed boundaries. I was. The notes I'd taken so meticulously now felt like evidence against me, a record of my own supposed cruelty. The second meeting was worse. This time, it was just me and my boss, and the gloves came off. She accused me of retaliating against Peg, of seeking her out to harass her despite my claims to the contrary. Your actions, she said, her tone icy, have expressed a worrying lack of cooperation with me and your team. She went on to berate me for escalating the situation, calling my behavior cruel and unnecessary. You won't get far in life with this attitude, she said, her words cutting into me like a blade. You're not likely to get anywhere vocationally if you can't be a team player. Actively sabotaging a happy workplace is no way to build a career. She concluded by calling this ordeal a teachable moment, a chance for me to learn how to behave in a collaborative environment. Bringing HR into what she deemed a small misunderstanding was, in her eyes, an unforgivable misstep. By the time I left her office, I was numb. My boyfriend, ever the fiery advocate, was furious when I told him what had happened. He wanted me to fight back, to push harder, but I was drained. I felt tired, confused, and deeply hurt. HR seemed sympathetic, but their hands were tied. My boss's allegiance to Peg was clear, and the office was a battlefield I no longer wanted to navigate. It has been a long time since I thought about this account, let alone logged in. Life moves forward, sometimes in unexpected and heartbreaking ways. The one-year anniversary of this account's creation passed not too long ago, and it was a bittersweet reminder of everything that has happened since. Ben, my husband, mentioned this Reddit post to me once or twice, referring to the Peg situation with a mix of amusement and exasperation. At the time, I didn't fully grasp how much it meant to him to share his side of the story with strangers. I dismissed it as something fleeting, a digital catharsis that would eventually be forgotten. But life had other plans. Recently, while going through his email, I came across a notification marking the anniversary of this account. It was accompanied by several messages from strangers, kind people who had read Ben's words and cared enough to follow up. Over 30 messages, in fact, some offering advice, some extending compassion, and some simply curious for an update. He had given me the password a long time ago, along with open permission to read what people were saying. Out of curiosity, I logged in and began to read. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Most of the comments were sweet, full of encouragement and empathy for Ben's struggle. People from all walks of life had taken the time to offer advice or share their own experiences. There were a few harsher takes, of course, critiques of how he handled the situation, or suggestions for what he could have done differently. But the common thread running through most responses was a genuine concern for his well-being. I could see now why Ben had felt compelled to share his story. It wasn't just about venting. It was about connecting, about feeling seen and understood. So many people wanted to know how things turned out. I wish I had better news to share. Ben passed away on August 21st, 2021, from complications related to esophageal cancer. The diagnosis came in early May of that year, a cruel blow that neither of us saw coming. He'd been feeling off for a while, tired, nauseous, and unable to keep food down, but we chalked it up to stress and his ongoing health challenge. By the time we got answers, the cancer was already advanced. The prognosis was grim. We didn't waste time wallowing in despair. Within weeks, we got married. It wasn't the big, beautiful wedding we'd always dreamed of, but it was ours, just the legal portion of it, followed by a quiet, romantic dinner to mark the occasion. Ben promised me that once he beat the cancer, we'd have the full wedding with all the bells and whistles, flowers, music, dancing, everything. Deep down, I think we both knew that day would never come, but planning for it gave us something to hold on to, a shred of hope in the face of an overwhelming reality. The cancer took him quickly. One moment, we were clinging to the idea of more time, and the next, it was gone. He was gone. In the aftermath of Ben's passing, the Peg situation found its own resolution, though it came far too late to make a difference for him. His boss, the one who had dismissed his concerns and belittled his attempts to set boundaries, was first suspended and then terminated. So was Peg, along with several other co-workers who had actively participated in the toxic environment. The tipping point wasn't just Ben's case, but the broader pattern of negligence and abuse that surfaced as more people came forward. It turned out that Ben's story was far from unique. His willingness to document and speak up had opened the floodgates for others to do the same. Ben received a settlement from the hospital's owner before his passing, along with what I can only describe as a generic apology. It felt hollow, a formality to protect their reputation, rather than a genuine acknowledgement of the harm done. But I know Ben appreciated the vindication, however small. He had fought to be heard, and in the end, he was. The details of what came to light were staggering. The boss's conduct, ranging from dismissing Ben's concerns to actively undermining him by deleting emails and stealing credit for his work, was laid bare. Peg's behavior, too, was exposed in all its ugliness. She had been sending out mass texts to coworkers, crafting a narrative about an ungrateful friend who refused her food. These messages weren't just idle gossip. They were laced with lewd innuendo, implying things far beyond the scope of food. Group emails spanning months revealed a pattern of mocking Ben's dietary choices and even his appearance. It was vile and hurtful, and it went far beyond mere office politics. In the midst of everything, Ben found a new boss who treated him with the kindness and respect he deserved. When the time came for medical leave, this boss didn't hesitate to accommodate him, promising that his job would be waiting when he returned. It was a small comfort in an otherwise unbearable time. Our friends and some of Ben's co-workers rallied around us, pooling resources to help cover his medical. Despite their generosity, the financial burden was still immense, but we managed. As for Peg, her termination didn't mark the end of her involvement in our lives. Even after being fired, she continued to contact us. Texts, calls, even showing up uninvited. It escalated to the point where I had to file a restraining order against her. The stalking, especially of Ben, was relentless and deeply unsettling. I don't know what drove her to such lengths, but by the time it ended, I was left with a mix of anger and pity for a woman so consumed by whatever demons she carried. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but feel the weight of everything that's happened. Ben's story deserved an ending, and while this one is far from perfect, it's what we have. His strength, his resilience, and his willingness to fight for himself and others left an indelible mark on those who knew him. Even in his absence, he continues to inspire me. To everyone who reached out, who offered kindness, support, and solidarity, thank you. It meant the world to him, and it means the world to me. Life goes on as it always does, but Ben's legacy lives on in the hearts of those he touched. Thank you for reading, for caring, and for remembering him.